All right, all right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to This Is What I Think I Know. This is not necessarily the first edition of This Is What I Think I Know, but it is kind of a relaunch of something I've been thinking about doing for quite some time. Want to welcome you, those of you that are watching on the Tithing channel. That's the This Is What I Think I Know channel. There is, for those of you that may be watching on my personal Facebook page or on the New Hope Seventh-day Adventist Church page, we want to introduce you to this Tithing channel. Today I'm going to be talking about tithe. I promised you earlier in the week I was going to be talking about some issues on tithe and some real fascinating questions. It's funny that ever since I mentioned that, my Facebook feed, not my Facebook, my YouTube feed, whenever I open it up now, and I'm just inundated with all kinds of little independent ministry videos and other videos that are affecting our church, at least the Seventh-day Adventist Church, impacting it when it comes to the issue of tithe. We've got a situation where our church and just the church at large, whether it's Seventh-day Adventist Church or any other churches, we are just all over the map right now when it comes to tithe and understanding some of the issues with tithe. And here's one of the things that I'm finding. I'm finding that a lot of people that are talking about the church and what the church does with tithe, how the church uses tithe, I'm finding that many people aren't particularly well informed as to how that works, as to what tithe is used for, where it goes, what it pays for, what it doesn't, as it pertains to the policy of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and conferences and all that. There are some people that think that the structure of the church is a little bit more congregational than it actually is, that when people return tithe and offering inside of a local church, that goes straight into the pastor's pocket, etc. Over the next 4 broadcast live streams, I'm going to be dealing with helping to try to unpack and uncover a lot of those things as it pertains to tithe. I want to just share with you, by the way, I hope that this is going to be a very informative thing for all of us. And I want you to share this if you can. Some of you, I'm not sure where you're watching, where everybody's watching. I know that there are some people watching, but I'm not sure where you're watching it on. So if you're watching it on Facebook, please go ahead and share it. I'm going to share some things tonight that before I really get into a lot of the theological and historical aspects of tithing, I figured I wanted to start with a very personal story on tithe tonight. But before we do that, I want you to make sure that you have an opportunity to share and bring somebody to this. Maybe you'll wait and hear what I have to say first, and then you'll figure out if you want to share it or not. That's fine. So let me go through some questions here. You'll see them in the description of the video, but I want to read through them of what we're going to deal with over the next 4, maybe even 5 sessions or so. Number 1, are we still required to return tithe when the Levitical priesthood has been abolished? We think about that time at the death of Jesus Christ when he's on the cross and the temple was rent in two. Whether you want to put that as the point in time where the Levitical priesthood was done away with. Some will go all the way to 34 AD when Stephen was stoned and the gospel is now moved out of the hands primarily of the Jewish nation and to the Gentiles. Say, okay, well, it was ultimately abolished. In whichever period that you put it, most people will say that the Levitical priesthood was done away with. And if tithe was something that was established to support the Levitical priesthood, if there is no Levitical priesthood, then why are we still required to return tithe? It's a good question. We're going to deal with that along the way. Can I forecast? Can I spill my hand on that a little bit? I'm not sure if I want to do that at this point. All right, here we go. Next one, number two. And by the way, let me know if you're watching. I need to know if you're there and what your who's watching, where you're watching from. So just maybe put something in the chat. Let me know that you're there. But question number 2, just because tithe, get this one a lot, just because tithe in the Old Testament, in the Bible, an offering wasn't necessarily always money in terms of cash, currency, can it be money now? I often will hear people say that tithe and offering was never cash. And so what we're doing now in returning tithe and offering in nickels and dimes and quarters and dollars and checks and all that's unbiblical, because we should supposed to be giving the first fruits of our increase, which in the Bible times were things like your harvest from your farming and a very agrarian culture and society. So it was either first fruits of your flocks or first fruits of your herds or first fruits of your farming. So why aren't we doing that now? So that's a question. It seems a little interesting, but that would be a thing. But it is, to be fair, it is. That's a legitimate question that I think a lot of people sincerely have. And so we're going to deal with that as well. Hey, there's Bible Truth 7:7, and good to see you, Elder. All right. Question number 3, and this is the good one. This is the big one that everybody wants to ask. Where exactly is the storehouse? If you're like me, you grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist church, and every single weekend, every time you go to church, you hear somebody get up and say, bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in my house. And so people have asked, yeah, okay, I believe what the Bible says, bring ye the tithes into the storehouse. But then people will ask, where is the storehouse? Because people is this church, the local church that I'm in, is that the storehouse? We're going to deal with that as well. And you're going to see from some of the other questions why people want to know the answer to that question. And again, it is a very legitimate question. It's a simple answer, just by process of analyzing what the Bible says, reading what the Bible, you don't have to analyze it, just read it, what it says, and then trying to figure out, well, then what's analogous to that today? So that's the process, part of the process that we're going to use to establish where is the warehouse. Number 4, oh boy, we get this one a lot too. What if my conference or my church is just really, really horrible, bad at handling money and consistently seems to make bad financial decisions? Anybody ever felt like your church was like that? Like, we make bad investments, we make bad decisions. We got people who don't know what they're doing. They don't understand accounting. They don't understand how the money works. And oftentimes, in our church, we've got people way on the left and way on the right. This is kind of that centrist group. They're not making their questions about tithe aren't as much theological as they are practical or pragmatic in this case. And we have that. We have people who have theological issues with tithe, whether they're on the left or whether they're on the right, tithe and offering. But then here's this group in the middle that's kind of pragmatic about it. And it's like, the tithe isn't being used effectively. It's not being used efficiently. We could do so much better. And so there are people who may believe in tithing, but they say, until we get better at this, I feel like I'm just throwing my money away. I feel like I'm just wasting the money. So I'm just going to hold it until they get a little bit better. So we're going to take a look at that as well. And then what's the next one? What if my conference or my church? Okay, I don't see the numbers on my screen, but the next question is, what if my conference and its pastors are just really corrupt and seem to consistently condone or promote people, events, and ideologies that are inconsistent with Bible truth and the counsel from inspiration? I know my church family will know what I mean when I say counsels from inspiration. Some of us call it the spirit of prophecy, or the writings of Ellen White. What if my conference and my church, they're not living up to this? These pastors that this tithe is going to pay, what if they're just not doing the right thing? This is a theological issue or question about tithe, where people feel like, I cannot support or condone with my money the things that I see happening. There seems to be a lot of apostasy, things that are happening in the church that should not be happening. Those of you who have been keeping your ear to the ground, you've been seeing things like there are people who are questioning because the general conference of our church would not grant a letter of, what's the word I'm looking for, of religious exemption for I gotta be careful with how I word this. Careful a few years ago with giving people a religious exemption from the things that everybody was getting at the time. I'm gonna be careful so I don't get flagged on this. You'll know what I'm talking about. That was a grave sin. That was the church bending to Caesar. That was the church bowing to even the Vatican. I've heard somehow it's connected to the Vatican. Somehow it's connected to a total oppression of the liberty of conscience for people. And so if that's happening, then why would I send my tithe to a conference or a church like that? So that we're going to deal with that. That one is a big one right now. And we've got some answers for that. It's simple, again, very simple answers from scripture, but we'll go there. All right, then can I send my tithe to independent ministries like, and you can fill in your blank, whether it's a structured, organized ministry that is connected to the Seventh-day Adventist Church or affiliated somehow with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or maybe it's a group like ADRA or a boys club or just a nice nonprofit that's doing good things in my city or in my town. And those are people who are asking those questions. I don't really trust what my local church or my local conference is doing with tithe. And I don't like being told what to do. I can't find biblical basis to have to give to my church and my pastors now. Plus, they suck anyway. People are saying that. So I'm going to give it here where I want to. Is that an option? Is that a biblical, viable option? We're going to deal with that as well. And then finally, the last question we're going to deal with in this series is, what happens when I do not return a faithful tithe? What happens when I do not return a faithful tithe? And I want to deal with that. I'm not going to deal with the full question tonight, but I want to deal with it on two parts. What happens to the organization? Who suffers when I do not return a faithful tithe? Who's missing out from the structure, from the organization? Very quickly, and I'm just going to give a brief answer. Pastors and teachers, employees of the organization, employees of the church are paid with tithe. In the general sense, tithe does not fund buildings. It doesn't fund evangelism. It doesn't fund, but it only goes to support the livelihoods of the workers, the employees of the church, pastors and teachers, Bible workers, any other employees. There are some exceptions to that. Policy-wise, and I'm going to talk about that. We don't always talk about that. We don't, but I'm going to be as clear and as truthful and as transparent as I can with you in this series. And then what happens to us personally when we don't return tithe? That's what I'm going to spend the bulk of the rest of my time with you talking about tonight from my own personal experience. I see some quotes, some chat here. Let me just take a look. Hey, there's Amir Abdul Hakim. Respectfully, we can't change definitions to meet business issues of an organization's 501c. Got you. Ariel Delgado, good evening. She says, I think that's a she. Forgive me if it's not. Those that have ears hear what the Spirit says. Yes. Hey, there's Aloma. Good evening, Aloma. Good to hear you. Yes, that thing. I'm sorry, I didn't see it when it came, so I don't know what that thing, which one you're referring to. But yes, we're going to get to whatever that thing was. Everyone read Malachi 1-3 and see the corruption of the priest during those times. Oh, yeah. God still calls. Yeah, that's good, Ariel. All right, and we're going to hit that. But tonight, I want to just tell you my story. I was a little hesitant to want to do this. I've never told this story in public, and I'm going to do it. I actually called my conference president today and gave him a little heads up and said, look, I'm going to talk to the folk about my experience in tithe. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be open. I'm going to be transparent. So if you get some calls, you got your call from me first. All right. So here goes. Man, so many of you know, some of you know that I grew up. I'm going to get a little closer to you here. Many of you know that I grew up as a pastor's kid, a Seventh-day Adventist pastor's kid and pastor's home. I've been a Seventh-day Adventist my entire life. Went to high school, started getting interested in ministry, decided to go to Oakwood College and study theology. That young man there, I'm calling him a young man, Amir Abdul Hakim Ali. We were students together at Oakwood in theology in those days. And I remember those days. He went by another name then, but he was an assistant dean there in the dorm, and just appreciated the time that we had together there. But as I was there, graduated, went on to Andrews University, got hired by Southeastern Conference, and then began pastoring. I found that in those days, even early days, as a student, and then even as a hired pastor, employee of the denomination, that I would get our little tithe receipts at the end of the year. Some of you that are part of the church, you know, the treasury always gives a tithe receipts. And it get to the point where I would see gaps of like 2-3 months in a row where I realized that I had not returned any tithe. And there were some times where I hadn't prioritized it. So I didn't realize it. I didn't know that and I thought that I had, but the record was there. And I'd go back and double check and check my checkbook, because there were times where I'm like, yeah, I know. And I checked my bank statement and it was like, nope, I didn't. And then there were other times where it was I knew that I hadn't. I knew that I hadn't returned the tithe because I had just procrastinated or I had something to do. And the main thing wasn't that I didn't believe in it. It was just that I hadn't prioritized it. I was living in situations when I came out of school, out of seminary, started my first pastorate. My housing where I was living rent-free, like wasn't paying a dime. I was getting my full check. And there was large periods of time where I wasn't tithing. And during that time, I'd find that, man, my check would just get to the end of the month and I'd start getting those little slips from the bank where I'd overdrawn my account and I hadn't, it's like, what was I doing? I wasn't paying any rent. I wasn't paying any tithe. Little things I was doing. I was trying to be helpful. I was paying people's bail, getting them out of jail. I was helping people get their cars unrepossessed. That wasn't just me being selfish and buying all that stuff. I'm sure there was some of that thrown in there. But the money would just go. It would come, but it would go. It would just disappear. And I couldn't figure out why. I didn't have anything. I didn't have anything that I could really, substantive. Next place I went from there, I ended up living, again, my living situation was I was living in a house where I was in the next town I was pastoring. Lady had died, a lady's parents had died, and they left her this house. And just when I was getting into town is when she was putting it on the market. She didn't really want it. She didn't know what to do with it. And so I got a house on a 2-acre lot that was about a 2,300 square foot house. And it had everything in it because she didn't throw away her parents' stuff, or her grandparents, I think it was. Full kitchen worth of stuff, full house for the free. She just said, hey, you can take it, you can have the stuff, you can throw the stuff away, you can sell the stuff, whatever you do. And I was blessed. I was blessed to be in this place, in this house. I was single, no family, no kids, no wife, none of that. And I was living well, but I still was not consistent in my tithe, in my offering. Left, went back to school for a while. While I was in school for a while, conference was supposed to move me from full salary back to a subsidized salary. Somebody messed up, and for the first 3-4 months, 5-6 months, they left me on full salary while I was there. Now, I'm going to try to be honest most of the time, and so I called and I told them that, look, I'm not supposed to be on this. I'm supposed to be getting something else. And they said, nobody's told us to do any different. And until they tell us to do any different, we'll keep it. I was like, well, praise God. But money was still like water for me. It was still going through my fingers, and I still had nothing. I wasn't saving. People who knew that they were saying, man, Pastor, you should be living large right now. Investing and all that. I wasn't doing any of that. Money was just going. Got out of there, got into my next district, and then my next district, I ended up moving, and housing was just a blessing for me all the way along. Next district, my parents retired. And I was moved up to Georgia to pastor in Georgia. When I was in Georgia, we found a house. This house was on 47 acres of land. 6,000 something square foot house, including all the stuff under roof. Just crazy space, pool. And I was paying like $800 a month because I was sharing that with my parents because they ended up retiring and moving up there with me. I was still single at the time. And I was just blessed, man, blessed after blessing. But I still was not being consistent and faithful in returning my tithe. Next district, same thing, same scenario, blessed with my housing. Got to a situation where a member had a house that had just got married and then wanted to move in with her husband, but was upside down in the mortgage. I think the first offer was, and it was like a new construction house. Again, like a 2,100 or 2,300 square foot house. New construction, nice community, all of that. Initially was saying to charge me like $500 a month. It's like, great, wonderful. But money was still going through my fingers. I didn't have anything to show for it. I had been getting these other little letters though. These other little letters would come in the mail, and they were from the IRS. I said "ara" like my folk do. Because while I was not also paying tithe, I was also not paying taxes. And Uncle Sam wasn't having it. And he'd been sending me little letters, and I'd be putting them in a drawer, and then I'll read it later. Some of the stuff I just hadn't even opened. Came home one day, and there was a envelope that was taped to my garage door. Didn't come through the mail. That meant somebody had been by my house, y'all. They found me. They knew where I lived, and they found me, and they came by my house, and I said, I gotta open this one. And so I opened the letter, and I said, I got a call because they were talking about garnishing my wages, all this kind of stuff. And long story short, that's exactly what they did. They said, Mr. Paul had to fill out some paperwork and all this kind of stuff. And I went, my rent at that point, I think was $800 a month. They said, we are garnishing your wages. And I got a call from the conference office. So the conference office knew what was going on. I was like, how embarrassing is this? They said, until you get this paid off, you will be getting $860 a month. $860 some dollars a month is what you're going to be getting out of your check. My rent, y'all, was $800 a month. And I was like scared. I was embarrassed. I was like, man, after I pay my rent, I'm going to have $60 to eat, to put gas in the car, to pay the insurance on the car. I think my car was paid for, but actually I had 2 cars at the time. I had a truck and a car. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I felt like it was going to be okay, but I said, "Oh, this is." And so here's the one thing that I didn't want to do. I didn't want my churches to know, and I didn't want more than I didn't want my churches to know. I didn't want my parents to know. That's the thing that I didn't want. I did not want my parents to know. But I remember at that point, Holy Spirit Lord bringing to me the idea that I had been unfaithful in my tithe, and that if I had developed that discipline, then I would have also helped to develop the discipline of the tax thing. And so I made up my mind in that moment as I wrestled with it. I said, man, if I return tithe on $860, that's going to be $86 in tithe. And I grew up doing 10 plus 10. So that's going to be $86 in offering. That's like $100 and something dollars. After I return my tithe and offering, I will not have enough money to pay my rent. But I said, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do what I know I should have been doing, and I'm going to return a faithful tithe and offering. So I, and the funny thing was that week that I had that conversation with that tax guy, I was preaching a series at my church. I was in the middle of a series, and I was preaching the story of Elijah. That was the series was on Elijah. And that particular day, the part in the narrative of the story that I had gotten to was the story of the widow who had the barrel of flour that never went dry and the cruse of oil that kept being filled up day after day after day. I knew I was going to the church to preach that story, and I just could not stomach the idea of, in spite of my current situation, I couldn't stomach the idea of preaching to them about God's faithfulness when I had not been willing to try him in it. And so I made up my mind that no matter the consequences, that I was going to go ahead and pay that tithe, return that tithe and that offering first, and leave the results with God. I went to church that night and I preached that sermon. As I was at the door, people were coming out. A guy comes through line. He was a guy that people used to call him a shepherd's rod. He would come to the church. Shepherd's rods typically are always, if you know anything about shepherd's rods are the ones who are always standing outside of Adventist churches saying, with signs saying, your preacher is lying to you. That's kind of the thing that I had about. So they're very anti-preacher. We used to get calls from the conference office about credible threats that they felt that they had, that shepherd's rods were planning to come into some churches and shoot up pastors and kill Adventist pastors because of their interpretation of Ezekiel 9. So the shepherd's rod guy comes through line. I don't know if he was really a shepherd's rod, but people said he was. Comes through line and he shakes my hand and he says, Pastor, I was just really impressed. The Lord impressed me earlier today to give this to you. And I opened my hand and he had $500 that he had just placed in my hand. Keep in mind now, I had not paid any tithe yet. I had just decided that I was going to. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to respond. I just like God is in the midst of answering of doing what he said. Even before I did what I said. that he will open up the windows of heaven and he will pour you out a blessing that you won't have room enough to restore it. I saw that. I went back to my office, and I went back to the office. A young man came in, maybe his mid-20s or so. Didn't attend the church very often, but he was there that night, and he said, "Pastor, I came today because I just had this in my spirit today that I needed to give this to you." And he reached in his pocket, he pulled out an envelope and put it on my desk, and it had like $22 and some change in it. And I'm saying, all right, God, you got this. You've got this. I went home, found out that I had a flat tire in the car. That $500 and that $522 was going to help get me to a little place, but not particularly very far, all the expenses. I had a tire on the car that had got a flat tire, and I said, I'm going to go down to this tire place and see if I can get one of those little $5 tires to put on the car, used tires, etc. I went to the car place. I had bought brand new tires from this place before. When I got to the shop, the guy recognized me and he says, "Hey, you know what? I remember you." I said, "You do?" He said, "Yeah, you came in and you were upset with us because when we put the new tires on your car, we threw away your old ones when you had asked us to keep them for you because you wanted to pull a spare out of the old ones." I said, "Yeah, that's right." This was like from a year and a half or so before. And he says, "I tell you what, here." He comes and he gives me a brand new tire, doesn't charge me a dime. Ay. I had found some guys in one of my churches or near one of my churches that were out of work, and they'd gotten kicked out of their apartment. They were living on the street. They needed somewhere to stay. And I first night I snuck them into my office at church. I didn't want the church folk to know, just because I didn't want to leave them out on the street. And I let them sleep in my office. I knew I couldn't keep that up, and so I eventually brought them home to my house. My hot water had been shut off. It was gas. I didn't have any hot water. But for the next 4 months or so, on $800 a month, y'all, $860 a month, the Lord not only found a way to sustain me, but he kept my lights on. He kept me fed. He kept these two basically strangers off the street fed and housed and clothed. I remember my landlord one month came to me and said, "Pastor," and by the way, the only people I told about my situation was the two treasurers at my churches, because I knew they were going to see a difference in what was going on. As embarrassing as that was, I needed to explain to them why they were only seeing what they were going to be seeing from me coming in and tithing offering. And I made sure that I had to beg them not to share or tell anybody else. I didn't tell anybody else but them. Those were the only two other people who I told at that time about them. I mentioned something to my mom one day, and you know, moms, I said, "Hey Mom, yo, it's tax time. You got any extra change laying around? I might be a little short." I couldn't tell her all of that. But that's pretty much exactly what I just said, how I said to her. And I was no way I was going to say it to my dad, but I said it to my mom. "It's tax time. You got any extra change laying around? You know, why don't you hook a brother up?" And so I'm expecting that if she does, she's going to send me what she normally does, $50, $100, something like that in that range. And I was like, that's going to help me eat. That's going to put some gas in these cars. That's going to pay this insurance bill on the cars, something. Turn around a few days later, I get a envelope in the mail. It's from Mom. I know that I can tell it's a check. No, it's not a check. It's cash. $2,000 Mom sends. I'm like, wait a minute. I didn't tell her what was good. I didn't tell her. She had no clue. It was years later she found out about the situation. But somehow the Lord had impressed her that her son needed. And so never in my life had she ever sent me that much money. No birthday, no Christmas, no graduation, no nothing. That much money in one time. Mom sends. Why? Because the Holy Spirit, God is working, because God had made a promise, y'all. And when God makes a promise, he has no choice but to keep it. And so, year and a half, $860. Didn't go hungry a single day. Didn't go without gas in my car a single day. Was able to keep and feed and, even strangers off the street in my house. We did have cold showers. Did do some cold showers, but it was Florida. Come on, it was Florida. Cold wasn't cold. We were good. Guys had been to prison. Both of them had been to prison. And they were like, yeah, yo, pastor, we good, man. This ain't nothing but a thing. We all right, yo. We're good. So, we were, we made it work. There's other parts of the story, but listen, can't nobody tell me nothing about what God does when he says, try me and see if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing that you will not have room enough to receive it. He does what he says he does. I'm not telling y'all what I heard. I'm telling you what I know. And I know that God is real. I know that God does what he says that he does when we are faithful. Because he says, and he does what he does when we are not. He says you are cursed with a curse when you don't. But I'll open up windows of heaven and pour you out blessings that you won't have room enough to receive it. So fast forward, I've made a whole turnaround with tithe. I've said, hey, I am going to be consistent, and not just consistent, but I will prioritize it. It's the first thing that comes out of my check. The first thing. I went through this time where I was trying to rationalize, why do preachers have to pay tithe? If all the tithe is coming to preachers anyway, then what's the point? It's just, I was trying to do the math, saying, okay, if they're giving 10% and then I put in 10%, but that 10% still comes back to me, and I still just getting the same amount. And I was trying to rationalize it. I said, stop it. Just obey me, try me, and see. So fast forward, I get sent down to South Florida. South Florida, I've kind of made up my mind. I'm doing this thing and it's coming out first and all of that. And I'm seeing all those other times where I've been blessed with housing situations with rent. I'm paying like a fraction of market cost for all this rent. Now ain't happening in South Florida. Rent goes way up in South Florida compared to what I've been doing. Listen, let me just say this. Right now, I am paying more in rent, and the Lord is blessed. I married up, married way up. Now, I don't know. I shouldn't say all this. I'll keep our business. But I'm covering housing costs, and I'm paying. Can I tell y'all that? Y'all don't want to know that. I'm not telling y'all that. I am paying 8, 9, 10 times what I've been paying in the past in rent. And I got money at the end of the month, y'all. It's not a lot, but it's something. I am spending more money, like in exponentially more money now than I ever had in any of those days past. But God has found ways, little things here and there, where God is providing because he can't help but do what he said. So when I find people, y'all forgive me. This is going to sound maybe a little judgmental. Maybe it is a little bit. But I wrestle with the idea that people who wrestle with whether or not they should return a faithful tithe sound like people who have never been blessed by returning a faithful tithe. It sounds like you're not returning a faithful tithe, or you wouldn't have the questions and reservations about returning a faithful tithe. Why? Because God does what he says he's going to do. He will open the windows of heaven and he blesses you. Now, maybe that's not everybody's experience. Maybe there's somebody out there who you have been returning a faithful tithe. And what's the text say? The text says, bring ye all the tithes in the storehouse, that there may be meat in my house, that you may not have room enough to receive it. And I know there's somebody out there who's saying, I've been returning a faithful tithe, but I still got room. I still got plenty of room for God to pour out some blessings. I would encourage you, wait on God. He's going to take care of you. He's going to make sure that all of your needs are met. Take it from me. My experience is real, is genuine. And look, I called my president today. I said, Prez, I'm going to tell folk that even as a pastor, that there were times where I wasn't being faithful in my tithe. And there are going to be some folk who are saying, why did they keep that man hired? They should have fired him because that's, breaking the baptismal vow. That's should be a condition of employment, et cetera, et cetera. So if y'all want to do that, feel free, go ahead. This is one of the things as well. I leave in the Lord's hands, but it's real. It's real. It's real. And I just know that God is able and God's going to do what he said that he's going to do. And as we go through these next few weeks, as we break down some of these other questions, I wanted to start with that one. What happens when I don't return a faithful tithe? Malachi is clear. You are cursed with a curse. I know what that curse feels like. I've been under that curse. I have lived under that curse. But even in the midst of living under the curse, I have been a recipient of the mercies of a loving God. I have been the recipient of the grace and the providence of a God who says, I know that you are but grass. I know your weaknesses, and there is mercy. And I just want to encourage somebody today. If I can motivate you, inspire you. You may be like me and you've been slacking off here and there. You didn't make it a priority. You didn't make it the first thing. You gave him some fruits from time to time, and what you gave him wasn't your first fruits. It was after you did this and after you did this and after you paid this person and paid that person. Try it. Try it. Try it. I guarantee you, God multiplies by subtraction in this case. He does crazy things, and he's going to stand by his own word. All right, I'm done. I just wanted to share that tonight. I'm going to get to some of these other questions because they're necessary questions that need to be answered. You may not hear exactly what you want to hear, but I'm going to do my very best to be as transparent and as biblical as we possibly can in answering the questions that you see in the description of the video below, or in the video's description below. Where is the storehouse? Are we still under this? There's no Levitical priesthood, so why are we still returning priests? I want to leave you with something. All right. Let me leave you with this too, and I'll revisit it again. I've heard people say, "Man, the priesthood today is so jacked up." I'm not supposed to say that. My mama might watch this. Priesthood is so the church is so deep into apostasy. We've been hearing stuff about conferences and conference presidents and speaking in tongues and all these other little movements and stuff going on. We've been hearing all of this and saying we can't return tithe because the church is more corrupt now than it's ever been. And I'm sitting here scratching my head. I'm like, church is more corrupt now than it's ever been? Listen, I'm a pastor's kid. I grew up around a whole bunch of preachers and stuff. I know that there's mess that goes on in the church, structurally, organizationally, personally, among pastors and clergy. People too. We are. I get that. No argument from me on that. But the worst it's ever been, check this out. Here's Exodus chapter 28. Take a look at it when you get a chance. And I'll go over this in detail on another video. Exodus chapter 28. Moses is just led the children of Israel out of Egypt. He's gone up into the mountain. Exodus 20, he receives the law of God written on these tables of stone. By the time you get to chapter 28, Moses is up in the mountain again, and God is talking to him, and he's giving him very specific instructions about what to do with Aaron. Take your brother Aaron, and I want you to appoint him, to ordain him to be the high priest over the nation. And he's telling him, I want you to take his sons and also make them priests unto me. They shall be holy unto the Lord. And he gives him very intricate detail of how to make this ephod that is going to go on his chest and on his shoulders, that he's going to bear these stones, and these stones are going to be the righteousness of Israel, and that Aaron is going to wear these stones that represent the 12 tribes over his heart, and he's going to be the mediator, the mediary between heaven and earth, Aaron the high priest. Exodus 28. Y'all remember what Aaron was doing at that same time? At the same time that God is talking to Moses in the mount, telling Moses to go down from the mount and to ordain his brother to be the high priest. His brother is down at the base of the mountain getting all the people's jewelry, and he's smelting it, and he is fashioning it into a golden calf. He is fashioning this golden calf, and he's having the people, he's leading the people in open apostasy and rebellion as they strip off all of their clothes and they begin to dance and party naked around this golden calf that they say, well, later, a whole generation later will say, these are the gods that brought you out of Egypt. This is what Aaron, the first high, no, I'm not talking about it happened eventually. This is the first high priest, y'all. And God is in the mountain telling Moses that he shall be holy unto the Lord. And his sons, Nadab and Abihu, also shall be priests unto God. And then he tells him this in Numbers chapter 18. You will set aside a tenth of all of the income of all of the tribes of Israel, and you will set aside that tenth and give it to the priests, the sons of Levi, which include Aaron and Nadab and Abihu, because they don't have an inheritance like I'm going to give to all of these other tribes. And you shall do it for them throughout all their generations. Like, wait a minute. Do you remember that ultimately God had to open up the heavens and send fire down from heaven and kill Nadab and Abihu? Those priests, those boys, those preachers' kids were so corrupt that God had to kill them himself. But not once did he ever remove from the people the responsibility to return the tithe and offering even to them. He did not make it the responsibility of the people to go and grab Nadab and Abihu and beat some sense into them. He did not tell them to hold their tithe and they would have nothing. They would have to conform if they took away the funding from them. He didn't tell them if they go woke, they'll go broke. He said, y'all, I will take care of this. The tithe is holy unto me, and I will take this thing. He didn't stop there. Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, same thing. Whole bunch of corrupt priests doing a whole lot of corrupt things, prophesying fire. They were set up as judges, but they were embezzling money. They were extorting money, all kind of stuff they were doing. Samuel's boys, same thing. What were their names? Samuel's kids. I just had them written down somewhere. Joel and Joel and was it Abijah? Anyway, I'll look that up. I have it next time. This is the one time that the people decided to do something about the corruption, about the apostasy that they saw happening among the priesthood. The one time that we see the people saying, we're going to address this ourselves. And what did they do? They went to Samuel and they said, Samuel, your boys are acting up. They are cutting the fool. They are jacking this thing up so bad. What did they say? Give us a king. Give us a king. We want a king. We want to solve this issue for ourselves. We want to solve this issue that God has been handling himself all this time. We want to fix it ourselves. So this is what you need to do. Move them out of leadership. Give us a king. And we see how that turned out. God says, all right, fine. That's what they want to do. But know this, that when you have a king, he will be like the kings of the other nations. He will take your sons and he will have them die, shed their blood in his wars for his reasons. He will take your daughters. He will make them cooks and bakers. He will make them do all kinds of things that are outside of what they should be. And he's going to demoralize and diminish them. He's going to use them for all kinds of things that you never would have imagined. If you want to try to handle it yourself, go ahead and handle it yourself and see where it gets you. But God says, I'm going to take this thing and I will handle it myself. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. We're going to go over this. But listen, I want to leave you just with the thing of this. And God, just try him. When we try him and we trust him, he will come through. That's it. Try him, trust him, he will come through. I'll see y'all next time. Have a good night.